everybody, it's Teresa from Crafty B, and in this video, I'm going to show you how to use 5 of your most important tools. If you saw the previous video, the list of tools and supplies that you'll need to get to start with stained glass, most of them you'll be able to figure out. I'm sure you know how to use a paper towel and some alcohol, but there are 5 tools that I'd like to show you how to use them and use them safely. So today we're going to go over how to use your cutter, how to use your breaking plier, how to use your running plier, how to use a grinder, and how to use your soldering iron. So with that, let's go on to cutting this glass. All right, so as far as hand cutters go, there's really only 2 different kinds. One is just your basic scorer. It has this little wheel on it that is what is used to score the glass. See if you can see that. And then there is the pistol type. So this pistol type basically is the same. It's got the little wheel that scores the glass. The benefit to this is 1, you've got a nice sturdy hold on it. And 2, it has this reservoir that you can put your cutter oil in. So when you start with this tool, you need to make sure that this tip is well oiled. This is kind of an old guy, so I actually just run him in a dish. I soak a paper towel with cutter oil, and I'll just roll the wheel around in there. Same thing with your regular hand cutter. You just roll the wheel in the oil, and we'll get to scoring the glass. So here I have just a piece of scrap glass. It's not textured at all. It's nice and flat, so we don't have to worry about cutting over bumps or anything to begin with. So there's basically 2 different kind of cuts you're always going to be making. You're either going to be making some kind of a curved cut, or you're going to be making a straight cut. So I recommend having a ruler so that when you're doing your straight cuts, you can ensure that they're straight. Trying to do a straight line with the free hand is a little difficult. So I'm going to use both of these. I think I'll do the freeform cut with this standard cutter. So all you do is you're going to take the cutter, run it in some of the oil. Now you want to hold it. You can see the wheel is on the one end. So you want to hold it like a pencil. And there's little kind of divots in there so you can kind of put rest your finger there so you can push a little bit. Now you don't want to push too hard when you're scoring. You'll hear kind of a scratching noise, but if you hear a grinding noise, you're pushing way too hard. So you just want to do a real light touch, not a real light touch, but you just want to do even pressure. And if you hear that it starts to grind, let up a little bit. So here we go. I'm just going to cut. I think I'll cut on the outside of this because we'll use this when I show you how to use the grinder. So I'm going to cut on the outside of this line. So I'm just going to place it up at the beginning of the line. And I'm going to just run it on the outside of that line. You can hear it scrape a little bit. Now you may or may not see a score line. You should see some score line. You probably can't see that in the camera, but there is a little bit of a line there. So that's all there is to it. Just this is a really handy one if you're just, looking for some easy tools. This cutter works great. Now I'm going to show you how to do a straight cut, and we'll use this cutter. So again, I'm just going to run it in the oil a little bit. Now when using a straight edge, you want to, let's see if I can pull this here. you want to line it up. Let's say, for instance, I'm just trying to do a 1/2 inch strip. So I've measured, here's my 1/2 inch. I'll line up my straight edge. Now, when you're doing a straight cut, you want to pull toward you. And the reason is when you're pulling toward you, you have a tendency to bring it in. If you are cutting toward you, you want to be able to kind of push against the straight edge. If you're doing a curved line, you don't want to necessarily pull it toward you unless that feels comfortable for you. But because your hand is easier to kind of guide going forward, you want to do curved lines going forward and straight lines cutting toward you or scoring toward you. So I'm going to line it up. Just put my wheel at the end of the glass. Pull it toward me. Voila. That's all there is to scoring. Easy peasy, right? Next, I'll show you how to break this glass apart. Right, so let's break this glass apart. So we've got our scored glass. Now, if you recall, we have a breaking plier. This is the one we use to grab and kind of snap the glass off with. It's got the straight edge on top. That's how you know which way to hold it. Make sure you're holding it so that the straight edge is on top. Little rounded jaws below. And this is our running plier. This one has a little notch, a little mark in the center of it, and it is slightly bent. So you place this on the score line and give it a little squeeze, and it will run the line for you down the score line. So let's start with the breaking plier. So this plier is good when you have small bits to snap off. Or not, they don't have to be like small bits, but if you can get in close to the score line, you can use your breaking plier. So here, I don't know if you can tell, you can assume that my score is between these two marks. So I'm going to grab my glass straight side up. I'm going to put it right before the line in the center of what I'm trying to break, toward the, not over the score line. You want to be before the score line. I'm going to hold it and I'm just going to kind of bend it down. I'm going to snap it down. Let's see what's the best way to hold this. So I just applied some downward pressure and it snapped right off along the score line. A nice straight cut. So that's your breaker. Again, this is when you can get in close to the score line. If I had a cut this far away, I would not try to do it because chances are you're going to snap it somewhere in between there. And that's not what you want. Plus you can't get, it's not weak right there. You're looking to utilize the weakness of that score on this glass. So this would not work. But what will work is your running plier. So even if I couldn't see the score, I can, but I don't think it'll show up on the camera. See if I can get it to glint. No. So the score is running right outside the black line. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my plier with the little notch side up. I'm going to kind of direct it the way the line is running to begin with. I'm going to put the score right in the middle where that notch is. And I'm going to apply a slight pressure. I don't know if you heard that, but it just cracked a little bit, which tells me the line is starting to run here. Sometimes you'll squeeze and it'll run the whole thing, and hopefully it runs along your score line. But if you just hear a snap, this is the time, and of course I put it away, that you use the little tapping ball on the back of your cutter. So hold on, I'll be right back. So I know that I have started the run because I heard it crack a little bit. So I'm going to take my cutter with the ball on the end, And I'm going to run that line down the score by tapping very gently underneath the score line. And you can tell, even on this opaque glass, you can tell if you're running it because you'll hear the pitch of the tap change. I don't know if this microphone is good enough to kind of get that audible discernment there, but we'll see. So here, the line is running. Over here, it's higher pitched, so I know that isn't scored, or it's not run that far. So I'm just going to tap, kind of listen to it, tap down the line. You have to go back up and forth over it. Eventually, it'll just fall off, just like that. So that's the easiest way to make a curved cut. Now, I'm going to show you one more thing. I can do a curved cut. Let's see. Let's say I'm going to take this and I'm going to cut this end off here. So I'm just going to make a little curve like that. Sometimes you can just snap it off with your fingers too. If you can get a good grip on it and just torque against that glass. Now, let me make another curved cut. I keep wanting to hold it the other way. I'm just going to make a cut here and use my breaker. So I've got straight side up, put it up against the score line, if I can see it. Can't see it in this glare. It's there somewhere. I think it was about there. No, I cannot see it. It's all greasy now. Let me do another one. Okay, here's a hint also. You never want to cut over a score. So don't go back and forth over your scores. If you kind of stop and pick it up, you can go back a little bit, but don't ever run over an existing score. You could run across it if you need to, but really you should not cut 90-degree angles, and we can go into that in class. But for a good score, maybe I didn't push down hard enough. I'm going to just kind of score him there. Still don't see it. Oh, I see it barely, but I know where he is now. So let me give this a shot. There. So he's good for getting in there. As long as you can get your plier in up to the score line, you can use him. If it's a long, straight or curved run you need to do, use your running plier. And that's basically it for cutting. Now I'm going to I think I'll take both of these pieces and I'll show you how to use the grinder. So here we are at the grinder, and your grinder is a must-have tool. There are other ways that you can knock the rough edges off your glass, but this is the best. You can knock extra glass off if you need to. I don't advise cutting your glass. If you have too much, it's better to score and break it off because these bits are expensive. But you can get some detail shaping in. I have the 1-inch coarse bit in right now. They come in different coarse grits. They have coarse, medium, and fine. And they also have different sizes. So the 1-inch bit is best for straight lines, longer, shallower curves. If you need to get into tighter curves and get them finished, you can use, there's a 3/4 bit and there's also an 1/8 bit. Actually, that's 1/4 bit, I'm sorry. So choose the bit according to what your requirements are. They just pop on and off the post here with a hex key. There are different size keys, so make sure you keep all your keys. You never know. They get lost so easy. So my particular grinder has this handy dandy little bit drawer that I keep all my bits in. slides in there, but I have it too full. So the other bits to this are a face shield. You can't see this. It's nice and clean. It's just a piece of glass. Slides in there, protects you from shards coming up. I would also wear my safety glasses just in case, because you will get paste and little bits knocking off here. You have a sponge in the back of your bit. There are other little appliances you can get to keep your bit wet. You need to keep your bit wet. But frankly, I've tried them and I'm not so fond of them, but I just use the regular old sponge. Then you lift the grid off and you have a reservoir. So you can see this is all glass paste that I haven't cleaned out from last time I used it. But I'm going to fill it up with water. They typically have a little hole here. You want to make sure that is plugged solidly. And then there's also a dip in it. I'm not quite sure what that's for. I think that's to make sure you don't fill it up too far so it doesn't get overfilled. So I'm going to place my water in the reservoir up to that little dip. I don't want it running all over. I'm actually going to wet my sponge before I put it back on. Put my grid back on. I'm going to tuck that back in there. You want to make sure it's far enough in the water where it will wick up the water, but it's also touching the bit. Okay, so on the front or back side, you're going to have a power button. It turns on and spins the bit. I'm going to replace my glass. Actually, before I do that, I'm going to turn it on. I'm going to wet my bit. I usually keep a little jar of water on the side. Tuck that back in there. Replace my bit or my glass. So we are ready to go. So here is our piece we just cut out. So here, let's see. Here's how it originally looked. You see that? And these are the 3 bits we cut off. So I'm just going to grind parts of this. Actually, I'll grind it all the way around because we're going to use these now on the next step for the soldering iron. So I'm not going to worry about this little guy, but I will show you how to grind these other 2 pieces. So we cut on the outside of our line to keep the line because it is wet and sometimes it washes off. There is a waxy little product called Mark Stay. It's basically wax. It's like a really thick, chapstick. So you just want to kind of slap a little of that on there. And what that does is it repels the water. So I just put some, now don't run your finger down there. That's a sharp edge. So you want to make sure you're going out toward the glass. You'll get a really good cut. Okay, so we know our line won't wash off. Now, depending on how you've drawn your line, you may need to cut on the other side or grind to the other side of the line. You might need to grind right up to the line as you're cutting and fitting. You'll know where on this line you need to grind up to. But let's say for our purpose today, we're just going to grind up to the edge of the line. So, got my mark protected with a little bit of wax. I'm going to turn my grinder on, make sure my bit's nice and wet. Now, I'm just going to, if you've ever used a drum sander, I'm sorry, I'm not sure you can hear me if I have the motor on. If you've ever used a drum sander, this is the same premise. You're just going to take and push the glass up against the bit and keep grinding. You'll see that the glass will be coming off, and you just kind of keep sanding it until you get it to where you want it to be. when I am doing, well, when I'm doing any piece really, when I start out, I always start in the middle. Because if you start out on the edge, you obviously want to get to the edges. But when you have a small piece like this, that bit can kick and it might break those small pieces off. So I always start in the middle and work out, middle and work out. Sometimes if I need to go around the edge, I will do it delicately, but you'll see I'm always starting from the middle of the piece out, especially on square pieces. But when you're coming up to a skinny bit, you want to make sure you're going out to that portion. Okay, so easy peasy. I didn't have to take off a bunch of glass. I don't know if you saw, but there were little shards coming off. So again, make sure you have the face shield on and your safety glasses on. But that's basically it. So you're going to keep kind of fitting and cutting and grinding your pieces to make sure they all fit together. And again, that'll be in our class. But that's how easy grinding is. Let me get this other piece ground and we will go and solder it. Okay, so I have both pieces ground, no more rough edges on the sides. So they still can cut you, so be careful. Now what I do is I rinse these off. I go fit them in my piece. Once my pieces are all fitted together, then we foil. So that's going to be our next step, is I'm going to go ahead and foil these, and then I'll show you how to use the soldering iron. Okay, so last tool we're going to take a look at is your soldering iron. Let's talk a little bit about the different kinds. So this is a basic soldering iron. It is for stained glass. I have never tried to use one that you might use for electronics, for instance, but I would imagine if you've got a tip and it gets hot and it's fairly wide, you could use it for that. This one does have temperature markings on them, but you can see maybe it just has numbers, so it doesn't have the temperature on it. You can always also take you can take any soldering iron really, but some don't have the temperature dials on them. And in that case, you'll need a rheostat. And you can get these rheostats. Again, these don't necessarily correspond to temperatures, but it allows you to control the heat of the soldering iron. So this is a nice little unit to have as well. So that's a basic soldering iron and rheostat. The one I like to use though is a Hacko. It has the temperature on the dial, if you can see. This thing doesn't focus very well. So you can set it for whatever temperature you want. You can see the light flashing. I'm heating him up right now. So you can have it with or without the rheostat. I like this guy. He's nice and light, fits in your hand nicely, and he's not too big. So you also need a stand. You can put your hot soldering iron in. You can put that back in between pieces, and while you're heating it up, you don't have to worry about it messing around on you. You also want to have a wet sponge. This, you'll be using it to wipe off flux off your tip. You want to keep your tip nice and tinned. Tinned meaning it's nice and shiny silver from the solder. So you can see when I wipe the flux off, it gets nice and shiny. You always want to have a nice clean tip. Otherwise, you will have problem soldering. So let's go get our piece, and I will show you how to solder it together. Okay, so here's our little test cut. You can see this is where we cut the curved edge, where we cut the straight edge, then we cut a couple of more bits off it. So we ground these. Now I have foiled them, and we're going to solder them together. So the first thing you want to do is take either your flux brush. I like these little dabbing painters. They're just little sponge painters. They're disposable, but they're perfect. They work with both paste flux and liquid flux, and they put a nice even coat. So I'm just going to put a little flux on my brush. Whoops, it's pretty sticky. So I'm going to we're just going to do these 3 lines here. So I'm going to put some on that joint right there, because we're going to do the joint. We're going to just tack it together first. So we've got the flux on. Take our soldering iron, make sure our tip is nice and tinned. Clean it off on the sponge here. It's nice and pretty shiny. I'm just going to take and I'm going to pull a bead off the solder. This will melt and stick right on there. I'm going to dab it on the joint. Let it cool a minute. Now, if I were doing a big piece, I would do that at every single joint. I would tack it. Since we only have the one joint, I'm going to go ahead and take the pins off because it is secured now. So you can see it's holding together as one piece. So I like to go ahead and do the back tacking. So again, I'm just going to put some flux on that joint. Clean my tip. Pull off a bead. Place it on the joint. Let it flow where it wants to go. So now, like I say, if you were doing a big piece, you would do that. All of your pieces would be fit together. You would flux all your joints and tack them just like this. That way you can move it around and do whatever you want to do. So let's go ahead and solder our lines. Okay, again with the flux, you want to just apply an even coat. You don't need a bunch. In fact, it's not good to have a lot. It will bubble and make funny bumps if you do. Oops, now see, these are disposable. I think this is his last day. Trash. Okay, so we're going to solder these lines. I usually start from the back of my piece. So a good way to start soldering is to just do like we did with the joints. Pull off a bead and place it on the line and let it flow. Pull off a bead, place it on the line. Pull off a bead, place it on the line until you've got entire line done. And you can see there's a few little bumps in there from where it cooled off before I put the next bead on. So you can always go back, just remelt it, kind of smooth it out like that. Once you get comfortable with soldering, you can run a bead all at the same time. So depending on if you're right-handed or left-handed, whatever feels comfortable for you. You just kind of place the solder on the tip, let the tip hit the line and just run it along. Same thing, go back and touch it up. Sometimes if you do it this way, you get way too much solder. So you don't have to keep the solder on the tip. In fact, it's probably best not to. Just kind of pick it up and put it down as you need more solder. But you can see there's a nice straight, not lumpy line. And this one, it's got a little bump in there. But that's what you want. You want a nice smooth solder line. So let's go ahead and do the back or the front. Oh gosh, I threw away my flux brush. Hold on. Okay, I'm out of my little dabbers, so I'm going to go ahead and use my regular flux brush. These are just like a plumber would use when they're doing copper piping. So I'm just going to dab a little bit on here. It's easy to clump it when you're using a brush like this. So make sure you just brush on. Now let me show you. You can see we tacked this joint. We tacked that joint. We ran our 2 lines. Now you can see from the other side, when we ran our lines, the solder bled through. So that's why I start with the back, because I can always touch it up on the front. So again, clean your tip. I'm just going to do the drop a bead method. Pick up a bead and drop it. Now you can run it. If you've got a lot of solder on there, you can just run it. Spin it around. Because it bled through, I did have some extra solder on this side. Now the thing you don't want to do is paint it. You don't want to try to like paint it like you're using a paintbrush. You want to run the line. So that is it. Easy peasy. Anybody can do this, and it's so much fun. We've got a nice, straight, pretty solder line. No bumps. None on the other side. Sometimes you'll find that you're chasing the bumps from one side to another, which is not fun. So you got to be careful how long you keep the tip down. But again, these are tips and tricks I'll give you in class. So that is how to use your soldering iron. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and we'll come back for class. We are going to do an online class. It's coming up the beginning of May, the first part of May, and it'll be an online class. And you'll be able to do it at your own pace. The classes will be online. Then we're going to do some not in person, but Zoom classes, some live Zoom classes, so that if you have any questions or problems, you can join and I'll answer your questions. Or as always, you can just send me an email at studiocraftyb@gmail.com, or you can post them in the comments either on the blog or on the video on YouTube. So thanks. I hope you have a great day, and we will see you soon.